Every person in community experiences the loss of friends, family, and neighbors at some point or another. But what are the unique differences in rural communities and agriculture? Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen, the youthful face you may or may not recognize. My co-host and father, Brandon, is the more experienced one you may encounter from time to time. If you like our stuff or the things that we talk about, like, comment, and subscribe. While you're at it, check out our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Rumble, and Twitter handles. All of them are below. For those returning, thank you for coming back. And now to today's topic, loss within communities. This is a delicate subject, so we will do our best to address the situation appropriately. Recently, the ranch lost two important members within its community. One, a very dear friend, and the other, an influential community member and friend to everyone. It brought forth some important emotions and thoughts regarding loss within the agricultural and rural communities for those communities at the same time. Often these communities are the same, but we wanted to address them both accordingly. First, let us begin with a Facebook memory. It showed up on the ranch page recently. It showed a short video of Brandon that he took 2 years ago when he expressed his nostalgic feelings about missing forefathers, also mentors, along with me and Braden. While one was from death, the other two are currently from work and life requirements, unfortunately. However, death is a forefront of our conversation today. In the rural communities and agriculture, death seems to come in many forms. Old men or women who depart this world to the next, friends who move on because of different happenings, and children because of unexpected or poorly planned actions. These various losses all have very real impacts on families, ranches, farms, and of course, like I've already stated, communities. Far more directly than often experienced in more urban areas. We feel that impact. What are those losses? They are more than just the people. It's memories, stories, experience, coaching, mentoring, advice, wisdom, and wholehearted love. What hurts the most from the majority of these losses are not just the loss of valued people, but also valued resources. A man very close to my dad, personally, Ron Carlson from Big Timber, recently went to greener pastures. This hurts personally. Also, a good man by the name of Art Nielsen also passed away. He influenced and supported the community until his dying day. Around where we live, children die frequently as well, unfortunately. Our neighbors, the Hoodite colony, often experience this struggle, but is not unique to them. However, it is common among many people in our line of work. So, with all that shared, what is the impact? What happens to food production when these important people are no longer around? And with that, I'll pass it along to Dad for his comments and thoughts, and we'll get the context of the whole story going.
Yeah, you mentioned Ron Carlson, really, really good friend of mine. Uh, there's people in your life that, and coming from a law enforcement perspective, back when I was in law enforcement, you work closely with some people, you bond with them, and you would take a bullet for them. And there's getting to be few and less of those guys that I used to work with, and he was one of them. I'd do anything for him, and he would do anything for you if you asked. Um, so I mean, that's a painful one. Art Nelson, local guy here, been around forever. He grew up here, and just a giant of a man. He's oh god, I don't know exactly how big Art was. He's like 6'7", 6'8", probably. I mean, this guy's a monster. He's just
A large
huge, but
human being.
large human being, but as big-hearted as he was large. And it's a good thing, because if you had any little bit of mean packed into that body, oh God help us all. But there's him, and I'll relate a couple of stories there too. But just before Art passed away, our neighbor just down the road, not a half a mile, she's 90 years old, and just absolutely, or in her 90s, early 90s, late 80s, right in there. She they transplanted out here from Massachusetts, and she had quite a East Coast Massachusetts. It's not a twang. It's it's a maybe kind of a brogue, but it is certainly a thick accent. And the more she talked about home when you'd visit with her, the thicker that accent would get. It was
Oh.
it was quite funny. and I just adored her. Just a sweet, sweet woman. Um, I got a birthday card from her one day or one year, a couple of years ago, and I was like, "How in the world?" Because I don't, don't say much about my birthday. It's just another day, And this card is in the mail. Like, what? How did she find that out? And happened to see her in town at the post office. And I said, if, I thanked her for the card. And I said, how in the world did you know that? She goes, oh, I just found out. And as soon as I find out somebody's birthday, I write it down and put it in a Rolodex. And for young people, a Rolodex, I mean, that's an older secretarial type organization for addresses and phone numbers, basically, where you can just turn it and dial it, and it's all alphabetical. And she would put people's names in there under that month, and then whatever month come up at the beginning of the month or towards the end of one month, she would take all the names and write out birthday cards and send to them.
Hmm.
I mean, just a very thoughtful, nice, sweet woman, and didn't expect her to pass away, but I mean, she did, and that's a loss as well. Before her, a guy that's been around a long time, moved here when he was quite young. I think he was in his late teens, early 20s, and Vern Weenham is his name. And I worked with Vern when he was working for somebody else, and a guy that my grandpa used to work for. He kind of came in after my grandpa left, and he had a fencing business. Really a good guy, and this is a guy that he wasn't necessarily in agriculture as a primary business, but it was a support business, still in agriculture. His livelihood depended on how well anybody else's did, and and I know they had some sheep and stuff as well. Um, but it's interesting to go to those funerals and you have an idea of how this person is. And Vern was one of those guys, if I didn't see him for a long, long time, especially when I wasn't living here and I was either in college or, we had moved and I was at a duty station in like Miles City, and it would be, you know, short-lived excursions to the ranch to help out. And you may not even stop in town. You just here, work, and gone. But it didn't matter how much time had gone by. He would, if he saw you, he would go out of his way to come say hi, ask how you're doing, what's been going on. I mean, he's just like that kind of an individual, and you'd never expect it from him. And what a guy that's just um, a prankster, love to just kind of, and all of these people really are. I mean, and maybe it's just that playfulness that sometimes most of us have. There's some that, that certainly don't, but he's always giving you a little bit of hell and teasing you a little bit, and just have that twinkle, and all of them did that, kind of that twinkle in their eye when they're doing it. So went to that one. That one is, I wasn't as close to Vern, but he was, you can tell the value of people in the community by, and really it isn't just respectful of their family, but it's a testament, I think, of the people that they touch. If you feel strongly enough to go to someone's funeral, then that's a big deal. And there's a lot of people at these funerals, and the ones that had funerals, and the common theme that I saw with Art and his family, and I know his son is, God, 10 years younger than me, probably. He's got some sisters that are a little bit older, I believe, but everybody goes through the same things, those same emotions. Death is death, and families are families. But the impact that they have on the community at large as well is something that I don't think you see in a larger town or certainly big cities. I mean, I think there's a little more anonymity to people's lives.
Right.
But I'm listening to, some of the people talk, and, one of the things that come through with like Art was absolutely passionate about his animals. The property that he was on, that his parents, grandparents had been on. And I think that stirs emotions in you that you feel the same way we're not different, because of that. And that's one of the big ties. And one of the things that was, said about him is, um, he there was never any time he didn't have time for people.
Mm.
He always would, it was true. You walk into a cafe, and I mean, this guy comes squeezing himself through the doorway, looking around, and you say hi, and he would stop and just visit with you before he ever, he would make his way to somewhere to sit down, just visiting with people, and just a joy to be around.
Yeah.
I can remember high school. There was a donkey basketball game. I will never forget this, and I think of this thing all the time whenever I have thought of art. Um, Even since this occurred, this would have been in about 1981. I think I was a senior in high school, and these donkey basketball games are, they have donkeys. Obviously, they travel around, and they've got rubber shoes on their feet, and they are very well trained donkeys. Some of them are pretty docile, some of them are not so docile. And I'll never forget the name of this donkey that they assigned to Art, because it was a pretty good sized donkey, because Art was a big man. The Master of Disaster was the name of this donkey. And this guy would be out there with a cane, and they were all trained, like trick trained in a way. And they'd start bucking, and they'd buck people off. And he'd get them to turn or just stop suddenly, put their heads down. Well, the hide on a donkey is very loose, like a bull, and you would just roll forward over their shoulders, and you would just come right down over their neck. Art was so frustrated with this donkey, and I mean, again, it's a good sized donkey, and he couldn't do anything on this donkey. And this guy was an athlete. I mean, he was a college track and very accomplished, like in the discus, some field events. Um, they got off this donkey, or come off this donkey on command. He stood up, and this is just a testament to his control and just his demeanor. He grabbed this donkey like around, like you would a calf, and he picked it up about 6-8 inches off the ground and just slammed it down. that was his his
Temper tantrum.
outburst, you might. Yeah. And I remember at halftime, and they happened to recruit me into this, because I was, I'd played basketball and I could ride. And I remember at halftime of this dumb game, he says, "I'm done. I can't ride this stupid donkey." I mean, he was so serious. I mean, he was taking this thing to heart. And he looked at me and he said, "Can you ride him?" I said, think I can ride him, at least a little. And so we traded animals, and everything got happy after that. But this giant of a man, who was so gentle at the same time, but this aging process, gets to us all. And his son was delivering some hay to us here several years ago. We'd asked him to haul some hay, and he did. And we're talking a little bit, and I asked him how his dad was. I hadn't seen him in a while. And he said, "It's funny." He says, and they got a large ranch, nice place. And he said, I was going down the road one day, and here's this pickup coming at me on the county road. And he says, "God, who's driving one of our pickups?" It's some little old man. And it was his dad, and it's like, oh man, I mean, just kind of a sudden realization for him. And, as we get older, he was starting to stoop down a little bit and getting harder to move around. But it's that passing from one generation to the next. And you hope that some of the values and the camaraderie and the willingness to be a part of a community and help each other, be there for each other, maintains after those people are gone. And that's kind of it's a big deal. It's makes you wonder, makes you worry a little bit about our future, and how things will be carried on. In the case of like Diana, they don't have a lot of ground. I mean, they just have part of what we used to have. My uncle sold them a little piece of ground, and they had it that they had purchased from people that my grandpa or my uncle sold to. But they're neighbors. And we went down, I guess it was just before Christmas or November, they called and asked if I could give them a hand. So I went down there and I'd plow them out when the, you know, snow gets deep or something. And because he's got a little tractor with a blade on it that, I mean, like a lawnmower tractor with a blade on it. And he just kind of keeps his place, you know, trimmed up. And he just turned 93 like 2 days ago. So, you know, when it's a lot of deep snow and it's cold, I'll go down there and plow them out. No big deal. I mean, it's just something you do. Well, she asked if I could come down and give him a hand, or he did. And so I went down there, and she had a Christmas tree that is one of those artificial ones that, I mean, this thing is nice and it's got different lights. It's got a remote control, you know, and they couldn't get it up from the basement from storage, and asked if I could help. So I was sure. So we went up and then helped them set up their Christmas tree, and they had it up. And he said, we're not doing this again. We're going to get some small tabletop one. Can't do it. And got it set up anyway. You know, he was kind of bemoaning the fact that he couldn't do it anymore, I think was one of the big deals.
Yeah.
And she was agreeing. Christmas time goes past, and then you know, you send the cards and stuff. And I think I was down feeding and went past her place, and I saw him out there walking towards the road with something in his hands, and he waved me down. And here's a plate full of cupcakes that she had cooked, you know, or baked. You don't cook cupcakes, but baked them and give them to me. I was supposed to share those with your mother. It was like, what she doesn't know, it doesn't have to hurt her a bit, you know. So I took some pictures of these cupcakes being consumed, and sent them to your mother. And anyway, it was a little bit of fun that way. But you know, those are things, there's those small appreciation things, just helping out each other. And you don't have to do that. You don't expect that, but you know, that's just kind of what happens. Then after Christmas or after New Year's, they said, "Hey, when you get a chance, could you come help us take this tree down?" I said, "Sure." So your mom was with me, and we went down and we folded the tree all back up, and it's got lights in it. I mean, it's a package type thing. And he said, "Well, you might as well take this home. We want you to have this." I'm like, well, no. I mean, this isn't ours. I mean, this is yours. I'm happy to bring this thing up. Nope, nope, nope. And so we negotiated on that and promptly lost, you know. It is so, but she's showing me some artwork around the house. It's funny because it was so important, as these are historical landmarks to her, where she lived in Massachusetts. And it's
Right.
like the naval lighthouse, where the commandant lives. I mean, all of these, the North Church, all of these places. And she is giving me history, and I love history, but the tie that she had for there, because that's her home, is the tie that we have here, because again, this is our home. So, you know, those things are important to each of us, and important to share with people. And I was loving, you know, this, because I was asking all kinds of questions. And she could recall. I mean, I think she worked with the historical society out there too. And you know, the preservation of these buildings and these places where a lot of our history started, and before, really, when we were colonies of England. But it occurred to me, those very same things, the very same emotions, those very same desires of the folks that have left or leaving, to pass that on as much as they possibly can, uh, regardless of what you're doing. I mean, she'd long been retired, and she volunteered at the one of the neighboring towns, their senior center, did all of their books, because that's what she did. She was a office manager in her professional career. So having those happen, losing Vern, then her, and Art, and now Ron. It's funny. You know, we talk all the time, not often, but you know, you get a hankering to say, "Hey, what's going on?" You think about him, so you give him a call. And I knew he hasn't been doing well the last couple of years. He's been in a lot of pain with some ailments. And he said, "I'm paying for my." I said, "How you doing, Ron?" He goes, I'm paying for the fun I had in my 20s." You know, is the way
Yeah.
he put it.
Normally
And
how it goes.
yeah, you know, so um, thought I was thinking about him a lot. One day here, the other day, it was early last week, and I thought, man, I gotta go see him. I gotta at least give him a call, go see him. I mean, I was just doing stuff around here, And this nagging, I got to see him. I got to go talk to him, see what's happening. And then that night, his daughter called me and told me that he'd passed away. But, the same things. I mean, you have a legacy uh, and with your kids, and you have a different perspective. And he was a crusty bugger on one hand,
Yeah.
but one of the softest, kindest hearted people you'd ever meet. Once you got past that crustiness, a very, very good person, very caring person. And it didn't matter whether it was a little kid, because his wife Linda had a preschool for years and years and years. And I would, be at the house, we'd be working, and I'd be at the house, we'd be eating some lunch, and he would just treat those kids like they were his own kids. And you'd see this guy who's just a growly, badger, just melt around these kids. And you're like, wow, I've never seen, the first time that happens, like, well, that's not in character. He'd leave and he'd go right back to his normal crusty self. But once you get to know him, and that crustiness, you could never see that quite again the same way. It's like, yeah, this is an act, you know. So losing him is one of those guys that, and I was going to joke with him about it, ask him how he's feeling, how his body is. And have this bond with people, that you do the same for them in the same circumstances. And I was going to tell him that, there was a time I was going to take a bullet for him if he needed, but the shape his body's in, I don't think that's a good diminishing or quite a diminishing return. He had laughed. I know he would.
Yeah, he would have giggled.
Oh yeah, but it was quite an honor. He was a warden there at Big Timber for a lot of years, and Polson before that. And he, when he was retiring, he asked me to go with him on his last patrol. And so we spent the weekend going up the boulder and patrolling some of those areas, and got some good pictures of him. And one of those pictures was there, shows him with his horse socks that your grandpa sold him, standing there, up on a mountainside, and I'm down below him. So it looked like a pretty majestic shot. He's standing in front of the horse, and they're both looking at it. And horse's ears are perked forward. Ron's ears are perked forward. He couldn't use them very well because he's so dang deaf, but what a great shot, and it just showed, it really captured him in his element. And didn't mean to do it at the time. I was just, recording, him on his last patrol with his horse, or one of his horses. And, and maybe it's just because it's me in a different context, showed him as a person, as like, that was his place. That's where he belonged. And that's what he was doing the same thing, that was his calling in life, and he did it, and he did it well. See him give breaks to people that were like, that was way fair. And others that were abusers, no mercy, so I mean, it was just interesting that way. And I'll miss him dearly, so almost like a family member in a way, because you get that close with somebody, even though you're not around them a lot all the time, you still have that closeness to them. And it's a loss, but you know what? We know those things happen. We know more community members will go. There's one thing that's certain, and that's it, So it reminded me, and I think your mom reminded me really, as my grandpa, as he got older, he lived a fast life. Holy crap. And, broken back and, car wrecks. I mean, just worked hard, played hard. And as he got older, and he was almost 90, he was pushing that. And he was just mad one day. And my mother said, what's the matter? What are you so mad about? And he goes, he says, I got no friends left. All my friends are dead. He said, I can't believe I outlived these guys. I should have been killed long before them. And I got nobody but just family. But that wasn't enough, because there were things he did with other people, other experiences that were important to him in much the same way, that as much as your family is close to you, you can't necessarily have the family fill in every niche of your life. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's a good thing, but when you outlive all your relatives, is one thing, and you kind of expect that, the older ones to go first, but um, your friends are somebody that you can kind of talk to, that you can't say things to your family, I guess, or you experience those things, and when they're gone, then yeah, there's not much left. So there's a big void there, and I think they see that from that side and that perspective as they're ready to check out. And you know, just kind of the way it is. Just, I'm just kind of rambling a little bit, but it just hit me strangely that no matter who you are, where you're at, um, those same values that you pack with you are important to pass on. The similarities in us, the a love of our property, our family, our animals, that passion to do better and more and maintain a lifestyle that few get to have. And even though you pay a high price for it, it's important to be able to live it. So I guess that's kind of my
Yeah,
rant.
I think I mean it's important to what I was talking about with it's more, I would argue, more intimate in a rural setting, even though people are more spatially apart. They're closer to the community, to family, because you like we've talked about before, you're further apart, but you rely on each other more, you know each
Mm,
other better. I might pass by the same person in a city or something, 10 times over the course of a couple months, but I've never really talked to them. I just say, "Hey, good morning." That's pretty much
right.
the extent of the acquaintanceship, so to speak. Versus, you would be in a rural area and you might see each other 10 times over the same course of time, at maybe the fuel stop, and while you're both pumping gas into your tractor or your pickup to haul animals, you're kind of BSing with each other for a few minutes. You get to know their families, their kids. Hey,
Mhm.
how's the kids doing? Are they, oh, they're about to graduate. Okay, cool. Oh, what are they going to do in college? What are they thinking of doing, as they grow up? You start to, you learn more about their families and whatnot. So like, that was kind of my thing is, what do you think is the impact of families and communities when you lose people like Ron and Art, and then, like you said, Grandpa, and then friends, like people who kind of over time they come in from the outside, but they bring with them history, like Diane from just down the road. What do you
Mhm.
think some of those impacts are when we lose people like that to the community?
Well, it's certainly a loss. I mean, it's a loss of a friendship or acquaintance, like you say. Um, but they fill a role. We all have a role in our lives, in our communities, and I think that because, well, let's face it, uh, if you put the perspective here that from our place to Nelson's place, it's 25, 30 miles,
Hmm.
but them kind of like, they're only a couple of miles away. You put that perspective
Or
in
a couple houses down the
a city.
street.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the closeness in distance in a city. It'd be, a couple blocks, you might know somebody, but here it's miles. And when something happens, you feel for them, you help them if you can. Um, when there's tragedies in a small community like this, everybody comes together, and it's regardless of um, their circumstances, who it is. I mean, you pull and you donate items. You have food brought to them. A lot of the local women will take turns feeding the family, or what's left of the family, or if they have no place, they have fire, and which happened to us. I mean, people stepped up, and they really took care of us when we lost everything. Um, and so that sense of community and it's not an obligation. People aren't obligated to do that, but they feel like they should. And I mean, I've done that with, the same thing with people. I mean, you do what you can. If they've got nothing that you have nothing that they can do it, you help them out monetarily. You
Hmm.
gather it again. I think that's kind of a modern day or an old time GoFundMe. I mean, everybody would pass a hat, and you'd hold benefits, have a dance, and all of the proceeds would go towards helping those folks out. So you do it in more of a, it's not a formal way, but it's certainly more a community, public way that you can do that. And then privately, you do what you can, clothes, food. I mean, you name it. You take care of animals. You do whatever you have to do to help people out. And I don't necessarily see that, you know, in a smaller niche area, and maybe neighbors do in certain areas of big cities, but I may be wrong. You know, I don't have that perspective of a larger city. I lived in Billings for a little while going to college, and boy, you're anonymous. You know a few people you're going to school with, but you know your neighbors. I mean, you get to know them, or I did anyway. Maybe it was a little weird to them, but those roles that are specific to that individual, they change. You know, say like Diana, somebody's going to take over her role of what she did. Vern, somebody will take over that role, but they'll never take it over like they did. There's a uniqueness to what they did, how they did, their personality, you know, and their interaction with people. Everybody's different. It's funny. At Ron's funeral, I saw a guy there that he and Ron hated each other. I mean, it's like, and I saw him walk in. I was like,
Why are
wow,
you here?
why are you here? And I think, you know, even with that is that basic respect of at least he respected who he was as maybe as an adversary. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know,
I don't know.
and
Ron might appreciate this one. Maybe the dude came around to double check that he was
just to
actually
make sure he's
done.
dead. Yeah, he could be. You know, yeah. There's a possibility that, you know. So, yeah, he didn't stay. He stayed for the service. But you know, there's always
Yeah.
food, and a little time at a reception afterwards. And you know, he didn't stay, and he could have, because there was a lot of people there that I know he knew, and would have liked to have visited with.
Mhm.
I'm sure of it, and chose to left. Which, you know, again, in his own way, I think that's respectful.
Right.
So interesting how some of those things take place too, you know, because I'm sure there's always, you always have adversaries in your life that you don't necessarily hit it off with, or don't care for, or, you know, you don't like the way they do something, and you're like, that guy's a crook. You know, I wouldn't piss on his grave. You hear that, you know, and,
Yeah.
but there's still a respect there, I think, at least for their family. And if it goes no further than that. So,
Uh,
it's
so
interesting.
we're kind of talking the friends piece, but I think there's also the family aspect, which you kind of you touched on, but I think the next question kind of it relates to both, and that is the the loss of resource we've talked about before with grandpa's been gone 8 years. You you don't have the advice anymore. You don't have the
Okay.
wisdom and the experiences. You've just got what you've got and everything that they were able to share with you prior to, whether that's friends, or family, or just somebody who you happen to more of an acquaintance rather than a friend. Uh, there's that experience within the community that they have those things available to you, to kind of rely on. You know, I'm seeing this problem with my herd, or I'm if you're a farmer, I'm having this constant issue with the last couple of crops. Do you have a suggestion? Like, what can I do better? You know, I've racked my brain, I've researched, and sometimes just the old school knowledge in somebody's noodle happens to be better than Uncle Google or any
Right.
manual that you can find. What's kind of your thought on losing the resources?
Oh, it's definitely a loss. I mean, it's, uh, you know, you may not necessarily know that person well or deal with them, but, I mean, I've gotten calls, just from just, and really it amounts to your expertise in what you're good at or
Mhm.
perceived to be good at. Um, you know, I've gotten calls, about working horses, training horses. Like, hey, I got this horse. What, and community members. Um, and so you'll talk them through it, or you'll go help them, you know. got a neighbor that couldn't get a horse loaded, and which is not uncommon. I mean, that's kind of a common problem for a lot of folks that, either dealing with younger horses, or they just have bought a horse and this is kind of a problem, or they do something inadvertently to cause the problem themselves. Anyway, you go over and you help them out. And I remember riding by a neighbor's place, and he's out there with a horse, and he hollers at me. He says, "Hey, you got a minute?" So I ride down into his yard. I mean, he's yelling at me a couple hundred yards away. I can hear him clearly. And I go in, and he says, "I've been trying for 2 hours to load this stupid horse into a small 2-horse trailer." He goes, he says, "What am I doing wrong?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't been watching you. I just rode up, and I talked to him for a little bit, and I'm really letting the horse settle down, letting him settle down. And I said, "Well, let me give it a shot. Do you mind?" And climb off my horse, and he holds my horse. And I just, did a couple of things to discipline the horse, where the horse, I wasn't disciplined necessarily. It was just making that horse know who I was, and walk him up to the trailer, tried him. He refused, tried it again, kept it up. And within 5 minutes, horse is loaded. And he looks at me and goes, "God, I hate you." But those are things. And I don't see him much as from my perspective that is that valuable. But there are other people, like you say, that I would go and seek their advice, even if I didn't know them really well. I'd say, "Hey, I got a problem here, and I know you probably have some answers for me." And they're usually more than willing to help you. But so you're right. Those are resources. That's knowledge. That's wisdom that comes with age, and you see those things happen, and you file that away and you use it. And pretty soon you're old enough that maybe you're not doing that stuff, and you don't need to necessarily apply it, but it's there for somebody else to rely on. I remember your grandpa asked my grandpa one time, sat down and says, I need you to tell me everything you know about cattle." And I mean, it's pretty open ended, right?
Yeah.
And he says, "Okay, what do you want to know?" So I mean, he would tell him, but you don't know what you don't know. How do you
Yeah.
ask a question that you don't know until it comes up? And how do you know to tell somebody something unless you're asked? Because you filed that away, and it doesn't even come to your forefront of your mind until it's jogged, or you're asked, or you see it, and you go, "Oh yeah, here's something that blah blah blah." And I mean, that happens all the time. And the older I get, and it's just gaining more knowledge and more over time. I think about things that I was told by my grandfathers, and it's just the way you do it. It's just the way it is. And it works, and you just file it away, and it just it becomes mental law. That this is the way you do it, or this is how you approach it. And it doesn't necessarily, this is always the way you do it, but the principles are put in place as to how to approach something. And so resources, certainly, everybody's a resource in their own right. Doesn't matter what their age are. It's based on their experience, or something they've picked up from somebody, or doing something. um, it's the way it is. uh, from my perspective, I don't feel like that I've got that much to pass on, or that much to offer, because you're always just, it is what it is. You have this um, way of doing things, or this knowledge, and you're thinking, well, something comes up, and you go, I got to tell the boys about this. I'll have to discuss it with them, because it comes up, and not necessarily because, man, I've got these things all written down that I need to pass on, or a book. It doesn't happen like that. But yeah, there's certainly times when I wish I could talk to my grandpas or my dad about something. Say, "Hey, what about this? How would you approach this? Do you ever have this happen?" I mean, you can't possibly pass every bit of knowledge down. I wish you could, but resource is a good way to put it. Just, it's knowledge, wisdom. And again, I don't think, knowledge is one thing. How to apply it, that's the wisdom part.
Right.
And I don't know that uh I still feel like, I'm 25 years old in a pushing 60-year-old body, but I've got a scared 10-year-old that lives inside of me too. So you don't necessarily think that you know it all, because you don't, but you worry about the things you don't know and can't pass on, or can't remember to pass on. So I'm sure those are emotions that go through with somebody as they're checking out of the life too. Uh, I know your grandpa was telling me when he was laying on his deathbed, we're discussing stuff, and he's saying, "Okay, remember this." He's giving me lists of stuff that he knew that thought was important for me to know, and you know, didn't write it down, just told me. And so, those things are important for them to pass on to people. And I know it is, because I know some of these people are doing the same thing. I don't know specifically, but I know in Ron's case, certainly, he wanted certain people contacted before they found out, in a newspaper that that he died. And those are important things. I mean, that's a way for you to tell somebody else they're important.
Right. Um, Another thing too is I touched on it at the beginning. It's more rare, but it does happen. The loss of children, the impact of losing children, not only within the families but also the community. I think people in general take it harder because it happens in ag, unfortunately, more often than it should. Little kids are either not seen, or they get caught in something that I mean, they don't know better and they get themselves stuck. I mean, there's definitely been cases where they get caught in, elevator or like grain bins and stuff, and they suffocate to death, or they're out in the front of a bucket of a tractor and they get bumped out and run over, or just smashed. What are your thoughts of rural and agricultural communities when they lose kids?
Uh, I don't think it's universal to that. I think that is universal to humanity in general, that when you lose a kid, um, you really don't recover from that.
Yeah.
Um, and it isn't about, oh, what they could have been. It isn't about that necessarily. It's like, this is a loss of life and a family member, community member, and they never got to become parents, um, become grandparents. They never got to realize their dreams.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a hard thing. And I had a interesting conversation with a friend of mine that, um, we're more acquaintances, but I mean, we've had some conversations, more friend type conversations. And he lost his son in an airplane crash, and he watched it happen. And he's a flight instructor. I mean, he's you know, um, would sign people off on their check rides. Very accomplished pilot himself, but his son was pretty young, and he said he was screwing around and he was pushing that plane. And he shouldn't have been doing it, and he stalled and crashed and killed him. And losing a kid, thank God I've never had to experience that. I never do, but I can't even imagine what that's like, even though I know people that have had that happen, friends of mine. And he said, that's something you never get over. You just learn to live with it.
Mm.
And I think that's true to a lesser extent, less intense to a community, because there are some community members that were killed, accidental shooting, when I was like an eighth grader, and tragic. And I think about that person from time to time, and that family and the tragedy of it. Um, and it impacts, and it seems, you know, the nicer the person is, or the family is, the harder that is. I mean, you can rationalize in a lot of ways, and I think it's a way to do it, to not be as painful, emotionally. But if somebody's a bad person and they die, or perceived as a bad person, or they're a drug dealer, it's like, well, it's too bad, but that loss isn't there like it is with somebody who is a good, productive member of society that's trying to help people. And I think about them from time to time. It's just not too far from where we live here. So those are things that stick with you, even though there are older people in the community that have been here, and many, many, many of them that die, you don't think of them quite like that because they live their life. Where the ones who haven't, um, you would have to ask me about somebody if they were alive or dead. And I said, oh yeah, they passed on years ago, but they were older or they had lived their life again. But if if you have to ask me about a young person who died, I can tell you probably the circumstances of what went around that. If you ask me how an older person died, I couldn't tell you whether it was a heart attack necessarily or, an ailment or a disease. I would struggle probably to remember that for most. Um, and I think that's because the emotional attachment that we have for our young, even in a community, and the young that are not ours. That is, like I said before, it's a tragedy, and I think that is something that's felt by an entire community. I can't think that I'm the only one that thinks like that
Yeah.
or has that same emotion. I mean, we're relatively the same. We all want the same things. We all feel the same things. So um, over time, their family members either move away or pass on, and they're not thought of as much in the community. And people move in here, and older people die. I mean, you're talking, good God, this was almost 50 years ago when the brothers died and the accidental shooting. And I remember it because I was part of that community at that time, and I remember how it affected the community. But a lot of people that are here now, aren't necessarily remembering that, or they're young enough that these were older kids and don't remember, the circumstances or even maybe even the names.
Yeah. Uh, moving on to kind of I guess a lighter hearted point, but not much is when you lose these people, friends, family, acquaintances, just community members in general, you kind of lose some of their stories, maybe their friendly company and their personality. So you're talking about Art and how he picked up the donkey, and you kind of lose some of those things, and sometimes you might have a guy who is typically the town embellisher. You might talk to him and he can sit on a bar stool all day and he'll always have some of the best stories, and he's been there around the world, a time or two, and he never seems to say the same story more than twice for whatever reason over the course of 80 years of sitting on that bar stool. But you get those unique personalities that you never, you lose them and you never get them back, or they just come back kind of like what you said. They do come back, but in a different format and a different person and in a slightly different way. And that's what makes everybody unique. So what do you think about that? Like kind of the loss of some of those stories, some of those personalities, some of those friendly acquaintances and good company from the community.
Well, I think we're a product of that. I mean, I know some stories, I know some people and some of their stories from the 30s and 40s, the Depression era. But I don't remember much about when, say, this county was first formed,
All right.
and that was in, I think, 1926, 1929. We broke off from Muscle County, which was a, then that too was a larger part of a neighboring county. And so I don't remember people necessarily. I don't remember names uh, that I could pull out necessarily for myself. Um, so you lose all of that. I think about, I like to fly, and I think about, people who around here who are old timers who flew. And I mean, they flew like the first experimental, well, it wasn't even experimental, it was a plane they built and then had it checked out. Helmrich's their name. And that airplane is hanging in the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman. And it was right here at Raggy, one of the first airplanes in the area that these guys put together and flew. Um, Actually had to have somebody fly it for them, the first time to get it airborne, and because they struggled with it. But that's all I know of that. I don't remember anything other than that because either I don't remember a story or it was never spoken, because somebody else didn't know. And certainly some of the stories, because there were people here 1900 and before, I don't know them unless they're family members. You probably don't know. There's a community book that was written. Oh, geez, it was in the 70s, and it's basically about the county and different people. They went to different folks that were here and at the time, and they were elderly then, and wrote stories about their family and how they got here, what they did, some small quips about it. And that book is an invaluable resource for what was that nobody knows anymore. And it's almost like a community genealogy in a way, which is really cool. And some tragic stories in there, um, lighthearted stuff. I mean, it's life. And, we're talking about losing people. I mean, we know what's going to happen, and we're kind of jaded to it in a way, but it still that doesn't mean it doesn't affect you. It's just that it's part of what it is. And uh digging back into those old stories like that, it's just what it was. And their lifestyles, their sense of community was probably a little bit different than it is now. Certainly is, I'm sure, with our technology and stuff, telephones alone, our mode of travel. We're not traveling with just horses and carriages, buggies, wagons. We're using some high speed automobiles and stuff that some of those folks would be like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get in that contraption, So it'll change. It has changed, and it's too bad, because I would love to know, because I love looking at that book and reading through some of these stories, things that you had no idea some people did, unbelievable things that they had overcome, or their story of where they came from, how they got here. And some of the most humble ones had some of the most phenomenal stories. Just incredible what they had done. And so it's neat that we can rely on that. The people aren't around, but thank God somebody had the foresight to write it down, and with
Yeah.
pictures and things of the era.
Well, with that, I think we'll kind of wrap it up there. But anybody that was watching, thanks for joining us. Talking about a more somber toned theme and message within some of our videos, but I think it's an important one because you brought up some really good stuff about friends and family, and I think one of the more important things, particularly coming from our ranching and our agricultural background, is that it is a loss of a resource in a very much a community way, because you may not, kind of what Dad brought up, but you may not necessarily agree with somebody all the time, but they do provide some form of a resource, especially in times of need. If you lose kids, or like Dad and his family growing up, they lost 2 houses to fire. The community comes around and they help you out. It's very impactful, not just for the people that are directly affected, but those surrounding them as well. So thanks for joining us. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dad.
Well, all I can say is stay alive, and we thank you till you're better paid.